with you. Okay. Imagine. Hang on 1 second. Oh, okay. All right. So this is new to me personally, to have a kind of call with so many different people looking. This is awesome. So I'm not sure what is better for you, whether you prefer seeing me or a source sheet or back and forth, okay? So I think even if you're looking at a source sheet, it sounds to me like I'll still be able to hear you, right? Okay. So I'm going to put on a source sheet, but if you guys prefer to see a moving mouth as opposed to looking at the source sheet, for next time, or at least for next time with me, we're going to dedicate this year, actually. My aunt passed away on Thursday, and I've been running back and forth. My mother's sitting Shiva, so I didn't get to be as organized as I'd like to. Otherwise, we would have sent this to you in advance. But next time we'll do that, and then you'll have it in front of you, and we won't need to play back and forth. But there's an interesting question that I think is worth considering on campus, okay? There's so many different things that go on, and I've just gotten a little taste of it here and there. These campuses, you're walking, across the mall or wherever it is in your campus, and you kind of see, a bunch of guys, and, they're dressed up with kafiyas or whatever it might be, and they're spewing whatever they're spewing about Israel. And you have this dilemma for a moment, right? Should I stop? Is it worth the invested effort? Do I want to go over to a bunch of guys who are, Arabic and have their opinions pretty much predisposed? Is it worth the effort and the energy? And then maybe you notice there are people listening, and so you think maybe it might be worthwhile. And that's just an example of a constant dilemma that you have on campus, right? Somebody's in the supermarket, and he, asks you, so what is it you do when you are buying all this kosher stuff? Like, what is that? And you realize, you have this opportunity for sharing the love. You could give him a shear, and you're kind of going through in your head, do I want to share a thought? Do I have time for this? Do I want to share a series of Rabbi Aaron's Torah or whatever it might be? And I'm sure this comes up all the time, right? And how do you balance that? Because if you're constantly putting yourself out, if you're constantly out there sharing, teaching, studying, whatever, then where do you have time to develop yourself? And what's the balance, right? And at the root of this question is actually something I think that you would relate to, maybe call it God consciousness. In other words, one of the questions one of the topics that some of us managed to discuss at the various points when you were at Araita is that there are 3 questions that a person asks himself, not only every day, but I think constantly, right? As you sort of struggle with tefillah, get in touch with your neshama, and some of us talked about the fact that, the essence of the neshama, of the soul, is really ratzon, right? What I want. And that there are 3 questions a person asks himself, right? What do I want? Why do I want it? And do I think Hashem wants me to want this, right? And that's one aspect of God consciousness. So do I go through that struggle, and how do I come to conclusion? And how important is it to keep that in my head in the various stages of whatever I'm struggling with on campus, okay? I want to share with you a little piece from Rav Kook. I love Rav Kook. This is actually, just as an aside, methodologically. Whoa! Welcome aboard from, where are you? In Memphis, Isaac?
I'm in St. Louis. Watch you.
Okay, cool. It's good to see you. All right.
You too. Great to see you.
By the way, just an aside, I'm not going to have time to introduce all the Maryland guys, but if you're looking at the screen, so the fellow who is just drinking a cup of water, that's Mark Weitzen. The fellow who just joined us is Isaac Graber. Isaac's in St. Louis. Mark is in New York and Rutgers. Adam wave your hand, Adam. Adam is in Cornell, okay? And then there's a whole crew who I lost now from Maryland, but they're there somewhere. Oh, I see. I do that. Whoa! I didn't see who else joined. Look at that. That's so cool. Kevin Wolf joined us from Michigan. You must be cold. All right. So, I'm going to stop introductions because we're never going to get to some Torah, but maybe if you want to stay on, I have a little time. So let me share with you. This is the beginning of the Einayah of Cook's commentary on Shas. We have 2 Sfarim published. One is on Masechta Brachos, and one is on Masechet Shabbat. I've heard that there are more Kitvei Yad, but they're not written up yet. Okay, this is a piece that Rav Kook has. I'm hoping that this works for you. You can see this. And he's basically talking about the introduction to Shas. Now, if you think about it, this is the first Mishnah in all of Shas, in the entire Talmud, right? Which means that, Rav Binny and Rav Ashi, when they edited the Talmud round about the year 500 of the Common Era, so it took them over 30 years to put together all of Shas. They were the Gedolim of their generation, the Torah giants. And although there are different opinions as to how this worked, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who edited the Mishnah, there's actually a famous, there's a well-written book by a professor named Albeck, who writes a sefer called Mavola Mishnah, in which he describes how Rabbi Yehuda Nasi edited the Mishnah. Were there texts already available, like, for example, Masechet Idiot, which is much older. It dates back to, at least the time of the destruction of Beis HaMikdash, and probably earlier in time for Rav Gamliel. But in any event, he decided to start with this topic, which means that in addition to taking a look at this topic, this is the topic that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the undisputed giant of his generation, believed needed to be at the forefront, the beginning of all of the oral tradition when he chose to write it down, okay? Add to that the fact that the reason Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, I'm really oversimplifying, the reason Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is putting this all down on paper is because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi recognized that this exile was going to be a little different. The first time the Jews were exiled, 70 years later, they came back, right? Cyrus' famous decree, they rebuilt the second Beis HaMikdash, Ezra, the Sofrim, etc. Now, some 60 years after the destruction of the second temple, the second Beis HaMikdash, the Koch rebellion is brutally put down. It's now, let's say, 60 years later, and we're still no closer to building a Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi sort of is a close confidant of the Emperor Antoninus, and he realized we're not getting out of this one in a hurry, right? We're not even at the apex of the Roman Empire, Pax Romana, and this basically was a 1,000-year empire. Literally, it was the only 1,000-year Reich, and he realizes we need the tool for the Jewish people to survive the exile. So that means that this Mishnah is where Rabbi Yehuda Nasi begins in terms of how the Jewish people need to approach and deal with being without all of their major institutions, away from the Beit HaMikdash, Eretz Yisrael, in exile, okay? And I think that, as you'll see, that very much mirrors some of the challenges you have. You're sitting in the old city, right? I'm actually writing to you. I'm doing this from the old city. I'm literally, 15 steps in my office up above the Beis Medrash, and I could walk up on the roof, and it's easy. It's so easy to throw yourself into Torah, to get inspired. And all of a sudden, you're in exile. You're Nebuch in the dark lands of Michigan or Penn or the different places that Rutgers, right? Maryland. How do you hang on to that? And what's the balance between, on the one hand, wanting to share and be out there, and making sure that you don't lose the core? Okay? So here's what Rav Kook says. Okay? Okay? So the first topic in all of Shas is, from when do we read Shema at night? At what time can you say Shema? Right? And the Gemara answers, from the time that the Kohanim come in to eat their truma. Right? Now everybody knows that there's a big debate, right, as to till when you can say Shema. In other words, Daven Mariv at night. But there doesn't seem to be a debate about at what point you can start saying the Shema, which is interesting. Everybody agrees, right? Now there's an obvious question, right? There are a number of obvious questions when it comes to the first statement of all Shas. Somebody tell me what you think the obvious questions are. I'll repeat this again. From when can I say Shema at night? From the time that the Kohanim come in to eat Truma. So what do you think? Okay, feel free to pipe in, right? Anybody? Obvious questions. Yeah? How do you get the faces right? All right, what are the obvious questions? Anybody? All right? Shas begins, oh, you're all muted, that's so funny. Shas begins with the idea, okay? Oh, that's cool. Okay, so that's an obvious question from Kevin. What's the connection between Truma and Shema? That's the most obvious question, right? What on earth does eating Truma have to do with saying Kriyat Shema? Okay? By the way, as an aside, why do we start with the detail of halacha, which all of Shastas, if you look at all the Masechtos, they do that. Right? Every Masechta starts with that question, right? Why am I starting with when I say Kriyat Shema? Why don't I start with, well, what is Kriyat Shema? And why do I need to say Kriyat Shema? And is there something upon which all this is based? Okay? And what is Kriyat Shema? And why Dafka Kriyat Shema at night? So you'll tell me, well, you start with Kriyat Shema at night because that's when the Jewish day begins, right? Okay. But why does the Jewish day begins at night? So the Gemara will say, well, because it's Vaye'er Vayiboker. At the beginning, Hashem created the world and he starts with the night, right? But why does Hashem do that? By the way, it's interesting to note that that's not so simple. The Rashbam's commentary on the Torah is somewhat radical for any of you who've studied him. And some of it was sort of kept from the public, even, I guess, what's the word? Not edited out, but when they produced the Rashbam, there were certain comments. This is one of them. The Rashbam has a totally different understanding of that pasuk of Vayer Vayboker, and there was night and there was day. If you ever noticed, like for example, in Parshat Emor, when we talk about Yom Kippur, right? So when the famous section that talks about the Chamesh Shinuyim, the 5 things that we do to afflict ourselves in Yom Kippur, right? V'ini temet nafshotechem, right? So it says Ubatshi on the 9th day of Tishrei, right? On the night. Right? So the Gemara says, why does it say on the 9th at night? It means like the beginning of the 10th day. So why does it say the 9th at night? Well, because, if you eat on Erev Yom Kippur, it's like you fast on Yom Kippur, which we all love. The Rashbam says, no, that's not what it's talking about at all. Right? Because you find the same pasuk in other places. For example, on Erev Pesach, there's a whole discussion about the pasuk that says that the Chag is Ba'as Arbo on the 14th day of Nisan. And so the Ibn Ezra says, well, that's a separate Chag. The Rashbam says, no, that's not what it's talking about. It used to be, until the Jewish people got out of Egypt, that the day began in the morning. That's how the world does its day. All of a sudden, the Jewish people get out of Egypt, and we're given a lunar calendar, right? A Chodesh is Alachem. So the Rashbam says, the Torah is telling, Moshe is telling, Hashem is telling Jewish people, on the day that you used to think was still the 9th, which is now the 10th. Right? He says, how do you understand Vaye'er Vayiboker? Vaye'er Vayiboker is before the Jewish people were created. So Vaye'er Vayiboker means, and there was night, Vayiboker, and there was day, the morning came, and that was the end of the first day. The end of the first day was in the morning. The day began in the morning until the Jewish people got out of Egypt. Right? So it's an interesting question why we start at night. Right? So listen what Rav Kook says. Okay, we should go back to that. Listen what Rav Kook says. Okay, Kriyat Shema shel Arvit v'shel Shacharit morim al bet minei kriya b'shem Hashem u'motelet al Yisrael. There are 2 different aspects to the way in which I'm meant to call out to Hashem, to make Hashem's known, the mission of the Jewish people. On the one hand, anu tzrichim lekabel ol malchut shamayim al atzmeinu. We have to sort of be aware and accept upon ourselves. One way of understanding ol malchut shamayim is the idea that we've talked about many times, that Hashem runs the world, right? V'lifol gam ken b'kriyat shem Hashem echad shelanu, shesof kol sof yakiru v'yedu kol yoshvei tevel ki Hashem Elokei Yisrael melech u'malchuto b'kol mashala. At the same time, we also have to call out and make known to the world that Hashem runs the world. In other words, there's one aspect which is sort of that we have to make it known to ourselves. Do I truly understand? Do I have a relationship with Hashem? Is Hashem relevant in my life? And at the same time, am I successful in sharing this with the world? Right? The Jewish people's mission was never just about the Jewish people. It's much bigger than that. Right? There'll come a time when the entire world recognizes the oneness of Hashem. Right? Okay? V'hinei begalut. Okay? And in the exile, if you look, it's like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 6th line if you're looking at Me'ematzai, what I quoted for you, right? V'hinei begalut. Hadomel Erev, and exile, which is like night, when things are not so clear, when we feel so distant, when we struggle with where is Hashem. Ikar pulatenu hirak benogel atzmeinu. So then the mainstay when a person's in an experience of exile and galut is to focus on ourselves. Kedei la'amod b'fnei hagalim b'Hashem Hashem. Because we have to make sure that we can stand up to the waves, to the challenges that come our way regarding our relationship with Hashem and our relationship with the world, right? Al ken balayla shayach emunah. That's why the essential aspect of night is emunah. And he quotes the Gemara in Brachos and Daf Yud Beis, Mi shelo amar emet ve'emunah avit lo yatsa yedei chava. If a person didn't say emet ve'emunah at night, he's not yotzei. Rabbi Sachs has a phenomenal article, which I think some of us shared, and he talks about why at night we say emet ve'emunah, and in the morning we say emet v'yatziv. Right? Emet v'yatziv means truth and stable standing. Things are clear. You're standing on firm ground. But at night we say emet ve'emunah. So everybody always focuses on the fact that at night you have faith. You talk about emunah, Hashem is not so clear, we're in darkness. But why does it start with emet? Right? It should really start with emunah. If you have emet already, if you know the truth, you don't need emunah. You already know it's true. So Isaac suggests, and I actually think this is based on an idea in Rav Soloveitchik, but he suggests before you can have emunah, there has to be some emet, some truth on which you're basing your emunah. Right? If your father asks you to do something, and you don't know, you don't understand why he wants you to do it, but you do it because you have faith in your dad, because you know that your father loves you. There's a knowledge on which faith is based, right? One of the challenges we have today is that you can't expect a person to have faith in something before there's a foundation of knowledge, of emet, of truth on which he's basing himself. And we have to make sure that we hold on to that truth does not get destroyed, that it doesn't wither, right? The translation of that, maybe, in terms of campus life is, what are the essential truths that as a Jew we hold to be self-evident? What are the things that we walk away from, let's say in this case, our year in Israel, but I think much more than that? And how do we ensure that we hang on to those things before we go out into the world and make a difference? Because for us, it's enough that we have a certain faith based on the fact that we've received a certain emet, a certain truth from those who came before us. I believe that my father has something to share because he believed his father had something to share, and it goes back all the way to Har Sinai, right? It's actually a lot easier to experience that here. You know, I have in my house, a student once bought me, it's a longer story, but a kad shemen, it's a little like an oil, I don't know what they call it, a cruise of oil. Mamish like something out of like Pach Shemen of Hanukkah, and it's 2,900 years old. It comes almost from Tkufah, from the period of David HaMelech, right? And it sits. It's the first time I ever had something which is muktzah machmat chisaron kis. There's halacha that is something so valuable, right? It might be that you don't pick it up on Shabbat. It's an interesting question, right? And you hold this thing, and you realize that most probably Jews who held this, it was found in Near David. And it has some certificate, and I don't know, it's priceless. Somebody got it for me and wouldn't let me give it back to him. It's something which people held who must have heard Nevuah, who for sure experienced the Beit HaMikdash, right? Like when we say the first Bracha Shmona Esrei, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, that we're hanging on to some unbroken chain, right? Umnam, right? Be'et HaGeulah, in the time of redemption, Shetarum Keren Yisrael, when Keren Yisrael really refers to Mashiachiyut, right? The Mashuach means to be anointed with the horn of oil, right? So when we achieve a certain state of clarity, which is redemption, which is Geulah, as Memela Tavo Shat HaTulah Shel Kriyat Shema Shacharit, then we're ready for the type of relationship with Hashem, which allows us to give to the world. And that's why we say Ahava Rabbah. Now you guys remember that we talked about what is Ahava, right? Ahava is love. What is love? Love is all about giving, right? Lavi, Havle Lintu, right? The second Sefer in the Rambam's 14 books is Sefer Ahava. And you look at all the things that are in Sefer Ahava, Hilchot Tefillah, Hilchot Mezuzah, Hilchot Kriyat Shema, Hilchot Tzitzit, all those things, the root of them is that I struggle with, or they're vehicles to allow me to think about what I have to give back to Hashem, what I'm meant to do in the world. Right? When we're in a period of Geulah, then we're ready to share with the world, because the world begins to realize how much we have to give and how much value there is that we have to give. And this is really interesting. Rav Kook says that's why in that period of time, the true understanding, the deeper meanings, the relationship with Torah will become revealed. Right now, this is something straight out of the Oraita textbook, but you know, it's interesting. Why do we call Tamei Mitzvot Tam, which means a taste? Because for 2,000 years, people began to perform Judaism. It became a performance. It was something we did by rote. right? And one of the things that Jews are finally waking up to, that we're realizing we're missing, is that it has to be meaningful. It has to taste good. There has to be a beauty to it, right? And one of the challenges is how to share a Judaism that's inspiring and relevant and meaningful, etc. That cannot happen in a state of exile. That can only happen in a state of Geulah, when things become clear, when it makes sense, when Judaism is beautiful and has something to offer, and there's a purpose to the long journey. Right? Somebody asked me last week, we were studying Tefillah, we were talking about the whole concept of Tefillah Matmedet, and so somebody asked me, do you think Rav Kook was Mechadesh this, that he sort of came up with this idea, or do you think he had a tradition, right? We ended up having a discussion about it. I actually think a lot of ideas that Rav Kook shares, you can find sort of alluded to in the Netziv, in the writings of the Netziv, because the Netziv was the Rebbe of Rav Kook in Volozhin, but nonetheless, the Netziv doesn't get them out there. And you could make a case for saying those ideas, the Jewish people are just not ready to receive those ideas until we're in a state of Geulah, which of course puts you in an interesting dilemma. Because on the one hand, we're living in a time of Geulah, that's at least my opinion. We're living in a time where we're starting to smell redemption. We're starting to taste that Jewish people could be back in Eretz Israel, living in Eretz Israel, having a society that could be a light unto the nations, etc. But on the other hand, we're still to a certain degree very much in Galut, in the exile. Right, so we're dealing with this challenge. Right? Until we reach that sort of enlightened state, all of these ideas are going to be frozen. Now listen to this line. This is an unbelievable line. In order to bring those who are far close, right? And we're not talking about religious here. It's not about forget about even how you define religious. We're talking about one individual who's close to something and wants to share it in a way that allows someone to come closer to it. Right? Now that could be anything. Right? It's certainly anything in Judaism. Right? And that's, by the way, why in Emet V'Yatziv you have a lot of Aramaic, because Geulah, redemption, is that stage where we're ready to share with the world because they're ready to receive. Now it gets back to the original question that Kevin asked, which is, what does this have to do with Truma? Yisrael em Kohanei Hashem ba'olam. We're meant to be a Mamlechet Kohanim. Now, on the one hand, the Kohen, okay, is the vehicle in the Jewish system that sort of is a model for a deeper relationship with Hashem. He works, he serves in an environment that's God-filled, and Hashem's presence is ever present. On the other hand, the Kohen, and therefore the Kohen is very much interacting with Am Yisrael, right? Aaron HaKohen was Ohev Shalom, Rodef Shalom, pursues peace and loves peace. On the other hand, the Kohen is also separate, right? When a Kohen goes into Har HaBayit, you can't go with him, right? When he, in some of the things he does, he separates himself. He has to be tahor, and if you're tameh, he can't be with you, right? If he's pure and you're impure. On the other hand, some of the things he does, very much he's connected with you. So what does he say? מצד עסקם בענייניהם הפנימיים, בינם לבין עצמם, ודבר אין להם אז עם זרים, דומים לכהנים. Right? So when we're doing things where we're separate from the world, and we're focusing on ourselves, and we're not allowing ourselves to interact with the world because we're in a state of exile, right? When a Jew is in the Warsaw Ghetto, he doesn't have the ability to connect to the nations of the world and be a light unto the nations. All he can do is focus on self and be sure that the core, the values of Judaism don't get lost. So then he's like a Kohen. He's like a Kohen in the aspect, lo be'et yohu Torah, or afilu be'et yakrivu korbanot, she'az yesh lehem yachas im zarim, but not when the Kohen is offering korbanot, right? There's some things the Kohen does that is very much connected to those. For example, there's 70 different sacrifices that the Kohanim offer at the end, over the festival of Sukkot, which is all about the rest of the world, right? Those who represent the 70 nations of the world, right? And the Kohanim are doing that for the whole world. Right? They're representing not only themselves, but also the Torah, Am Yisrael, Hashem, right? But when they go in to eat the Truma, then they're immersing themselves in the world of Kahuna. of priesthood, separation. They can't, they're not meant to be with the stranger. Because a stranger, a person who isn't a Kohen, is not allowed to eat from this at all. Right? And as a matter of fact, he's supposed to be separate from him. In fact, the Kohanim eating truma, there's a big discussion about this, so we're not going to get into the halachic, but it may well be that somebody who isn't Kohen can't sit at the table and eat with them. Right? The period of time when we're in night, Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit, is when the Jewish people are meant to be a people that dwells alone. To make sure to hang on to the essentials, to the essence, to the Kedusha, to the deeper spiritual holiness of what it is we're doing. So what does this mean, right? What are we saying here? There are two different aspects. Now, every Jew says Kriyat Shema at night, and he also says Kriyat Shema in the day. And I wonder if one of the challenges, in any given moment, and at every given time, am I in a moment of Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit, of night, or am I in a moment of Kriyat Shema Shel Shacharit, of morning? And a day cannot be a day without both, right? Even, by the way, in when one day we're all back in Eretz Yisrael, right, and we're blessed to finally leave St. Louis and Michigan and Maryland, and we all come home, there's still moments in your day where you have to take a step back and to some degree exile yourself from the world, right? The Jewish people spend 40 years in the desert before they're ready to enter Eretz Yisrael. We take a step back in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, and we experience tefillah, to take a step back from the world, to be in a little bit of exile, right? But at the same time, sometimes I'm in the moment of Shacharit. And I think one of the challenges on campus, right, is to know the difference, to know in what moments I want to be experiencing Kriyat Shema. If I have lots of Kriyat Shema Shel Shacharit, I'm all about sharing with the world and everything is about the world, but I don't have any growth, there's no opportunity to develop myself, to hang on to my core values, then it all gets lost. But if I spend so much time focusing on core values to get through 4 years of college, I don't want to lose my Judaism, whatever, then I lose something even deeper. I lose the reason that I'm hanging on to my core values. Right? And that balance, and by the way, the source of all of that is Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, is God consciousness. Is there a ratzon? Is there a will that's there? Am I tapping into something so much bigger than myself? Right? That balance is how all of Shas begins. That's how Rabbi Yehuda Nasi begins the journey into exile. And I want you to know, it's such an easy thing for me, sitting in Yerushalayim, to have this discussion, because, like, what's my exile? Like, 2 weeks I come to America, right? I think for you guys, it's much, much more difficult. I cannot begin to tell you how in awe I am of the fact, first of all, that in all your different places that you're willing to take off time on a Sunday morning and get online and just do a little learning. I think that's awesome. And we hear about all the different things a lot of you guys are doing. That's even more awesome. The fact that 2, 3, 4 years out of a right that we're still talking to each other and learning together, I can't even begin to tell you what a powerful feeling that is for me. And I give you a bracha, all of you, that you should keep going with Chayil, that we should succeed, really, in finding the balance between those two levels of Kriyat Shema, whether it be the recharge we sometimes need for ourselves, the metz, the foundation on which our emunah needs to be based, and the ability to enter sometimes periods of Kriyat Shema Shel Shacharit and make a difference. That's a little bit of food for thought. I thought we could maybe open up, I promised to finish by, I guess it's 11 your time, but I have a little more time if you guys want to ask questions. I don't know how that works, yeah? So if anybody has a question, feel free, unmute yourself, I'm all ears. I don't know how we go back and forth, but does anybody have any questions? You're just in awe and starstruck. Kevin, I've never heard you quiet for this long. It's an amazing experience. All right. I'll give you a little. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. I'm looking forward to seeing some of you. Hope to get to Maryland. Hope to get to YU. Hope to get to Rutgers. And one of us will certainly be back.
Yeah.
All right, we love you guys. We miss you. Last thing.
Thanks, Vinny.
I'm not.